Welcome back, all you cool cats and kittens. This is your Commissioner Tim coming back at you. I am still away from home, but for the last time for the next few weeks, still here in Korea. Anyways, back at you here with the week 8 recap and your entertainment heading into week 9. What another beautiful week of fantasy football, gentlemen. We've definitely had some grueling injuries that has set a cloud over the short term and the long term prospects for some of our teams. But hey, we're now officially in the second half of the season, believe it or not. And right now, where things stand, we got 5 teams locked in for the playoffs, and the 6th seed very much still up in the air with the same 4 teams as we head into week 9. I will talk more about the individual movements to each team in the power ranking section, but let's kick it off with my favorite segment with the Nostradamus race. All right, so matchup number 1, y'all got this one right, 100% of you. I also appreciate the 100% participation rate this week. So John notches his 4th straight, one of the hottest teams in the league right now, to move up to 5-3 behind a disappointing 114 due to Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams' play. But a couple positive notes. It was really good to see Javonte Williams finally getting the workload he showed he deserved in his rookie season before the injury that he had. Perhaps he's actually finally acclimated to not just a new offense, but he has perhaps maybe fully recovered from his injury as well. I think the challenge for John will be on who he selects to start each week at the non-obvious positions. Because as you can see from his max points for, it's quite high on a week-to-week basis. So if he's right in picking them, he will have weeks where he puts up 170. If he's not, he'll have more disappointing weeks like this one. Thankfully, he was facing 2 shots, no cup. And was 114 was enough to get the victory for him. Now on the Eve side, Eve was off to an awesome start this week, and perhaps if Tyrod Taylor didn't exit the game so early from injury, we would have been rooting for Eve to break 100 for the first time this season, for a longer time throughout Sunday and perhaps into the Monday games as well, because I believe he had Michael Mayer playing on Monday. Eve, I still believe that you can break that mark. It'll be the window where Kyler Murray starts and before James Conner is back. So you get a boost to the rookie DeMarcado running back, and also where you get a legit 2 quarterback output. So it needs to happen sometime in the next few weeks, next couple of weeks. So it'll be soon, and I believe. All right, moving over to matchup number 2. Simple one here. Everyone gets this one right as well. I'll talk more about Bills Mafia during the power ranking section, but I said last week, Bills Mafia is a contender if one of Eckler or Gibbs can finish out as a top 5 running back rest of seasons. Well, we saw a week where both were, and it was one of Brandon's highest scoring weeks outside of his QB positions. Now, I'm making that specifically explicit because I don't care. I'm not worried about his quarterback. Definitely not worried about how Mahomes played in week 8. Bills Mafia likely has 160, 170 type of a week had he had a healthy Mahomes this week, which definitely puts you right up there as a contender, if not a favorite. So Bills Mafia now moves up to 6-2, sitting at the number 2 position all by himself. The all-important top 2 seeding is now his through 8 weeks, and it will be a race to watch for the rest of the season. Our boy Brad, Wooksy Fingerhold, moves down to 3-5 on his 2nd consecutive loss, the leader of the teams in position for the 6th and the last playoff spot. Disappointing week, not necessarily because of the loss, but due to the injury to Matt Stafford, who is definitely out in week 9 and maybe out for a much longer time. And Matt Stafford is also going out in a time where it's critical for Wooksy Fingerhold's playoff positioning and a heavily detriment Puka Nakua's output, who has been one of the 2 godsends for Brad. That also includes Tua, who obviously has still balling. Moving over to matchup number 3, we got Braystar Dynasty getting his 5th victory, bouncing back from a loss last week, while Mr. Ambassador was unable to pair together a consecutive victory. I will talk about both of these teams more during the power ranking section, but following Kyle's advice, maybe we should really bet on the over and under of Travis Kelce on whether or not Taylor Swift is at the game or not. Everyone got this one right, except for the Montana boys. I love and appreciate that you bet on yourself, Sergey. Unfortunately, it did not pay off here. Moving over to matchup number 4, Ditka gets his must-win victory here. He's going to have several must-win victories I'll talk about a little bit later in this video, but must win here to keep his playoff path alive, and does it in a convincing fashion, putting up the third highest score this week in CCK. Travis moves up to just a game behind the 6th seed with a likely chance to be tied at the 6th after this week, believe it or not. So there's so much to talk about Huge Dicka's path to playoffs. So I got a special section coming up to talk about that later in this video. As for Kevin, while it's obviously better to win and, and instead he got his third straight loss, but I'm pretty thrilled if I'm in Kevin's shoes with what I saw in week 8. Yes, the injuries suck big time to Kendrick Bourne and Kirk Cousins. That's going to be affecting Jordan Addison, who has been balling out since Justin Jefferson's injury. So it will likely hold him back from contending for the playoff spot, even though he is tied at 6th at the moment. But dude, Will Levis finally got his chance to start, and he absolutely balled out. If Will Levis can become a second dynasty quarterback piece for Kevin alongside Anthony Richardson, who I believe before his injury showed enough in the first 3 weeks that he is, Kevin probably ends up having the best draft out of anyone this season. All right, moving over to matchup number 5. This was the commissioner's matchup of the week, and it definitely did not disappoint. You saw the matchup that finished with the top 2 scoring outputs of the week. Kyle continues to show why he's a legit contender, even in a loss. Obviously, you're just not going to win against a team putting up 200 plus. And unfortunately for Kyle, that's what he got in week 8 from Just a Process. It was just a great defense of the best season to start record title that Kyle holds. But now I am tied with Kyle's start from last season, sitting at 8-0, and likely have a great chance to extend that out further as I now conclude the hardest stretch of the season to date, and having to go through quite the gauntlet over the last few weeks. I feel like this matchup was the first one, if my memory serves me right, that went exactly 50-50 in the Nostradamus picks this season. So it was a nail-biter heading into it for sure as well. In terms of my team, I'm happy with my team and surprised and thrilled that I'm able to put up these types of weeks, even without my actual QB2 and wide receiver 1. But I do thank the fantasy gods for the health and production I've been able to have to date, even despite those injuries. While I don't expect this level of output to continue through the end of the seasons, I do hope for another memorable season. That said, we had 5 perfect pick'ems this past week, and it also happens to be all of the 5 who picked me to beat Kyle. So thank you for your support for everyone who picked me. Smart people have a way of revealing themselves. All right, so this is the updated tally through 8 weeks of pick'ems. Eve and I are tied at 33, with Kyle and John just 1 behind at 32, and Ryan not too far back at 31. I also didn't want to mention this until we were officially in the second half of the season, just to make sure that we're not dealing with small sample sizes, and certainly not shit talking on small data. But Commissioner Brandon is a comfortable dead last in terms of his pick probability at only 57.5% picking correctly. It's more than 11% worse than the second worst picker, who is Mr. Ambassador. The commissioner curse that started last year is very, very real, gentlemen. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, Brad is our best picker at 82.86%, 0.03% ahead of Eve and Tim, who are at 82.5, but ahead of Brad on totals due to the perfect participation. I believe Brad missed 1 week. Anyways, let's move over into another one of my favorite sections, the season power rankings. This section is going to be a little bit fun. I'm going to really try to dive into the 6th seed and highlight that. So I'll go like a team by team there a little bit again, kind of like a recap and a summary and a circle back on what we did on week 5 video. No changes for me in the power rankings for the top 5 or Eve at 10. I think you can make an argument for John slipping a bit due to Cooper Kupp's inferred, perhaps season-long, at least the beyond couple of games effect due to Stafford's thumb injury. But it's also offset with what we saw in Javonte Williams finally getting the workhorse role, getting 30 touches for Denver. And it's not just one game fluke either. I think this is here to stay. He, meaning Javonte Williams, has been increasing his snap share from a 45% to start the season to now a season high of 63%. Just been steadily progressing week to week. Now, for the rest of the 5 teams, we saw what we needed and expected to see, and that's why the things are staying as is. For our number 2 ranked teams, Moncton Meerkats scored the second highest output this past week, but unfortunately against the number 1 team who came with, eclipsing the 2-century mark for the second time this season. And our 3rd ranked team last week, Bills Mafia, I said if either Eckler or Gibbs can finish out the season as a top 5 running back, rest of the season, then he will be a contender. We saw further evidence pointing to that and that potential possibility in both of their performances for Eckler and Gibbs in week 8. So, like I said, I think he probably puts up around 160, 170 had Mahomes been healthy. And he likely would have had another 60-plus burger from the 2 elite QBs that he's got at his position, who are definitely in a tier of their own in the league now that Jalen Hurts has been playing better. The 2 and 3 between Moncton Meerkats and Bills Mafia are very, very close to me. I wouldn't fight you if you tell Bills Mafia should be ranked 2, especially if you look at the last 4 weeks of how these teams have fared. Obviously, Bills Mafia was giving him a lot of hard time in the first month of the season because of how poorly he was playing relative to expectations. But certainly over the last handful of weeks, things have picked up significantly to where the expectations are. So for me, you can swap that 2 and 3 around, and I wouldn't fight you. The race for the top 2 seeds who get the playoff bye week is still up in the air for all the top 5 teams. The number 1, number 2 are still up in the air. The upcoming matchups that will carry the biggest impact to this top 2 bye week playoff race is going to be in week 10 against Bills Mafia and Moncton Meerkats. Week 11, Full Jerry versus Braystar Dynasty. And then concluding with week 13 matchup with Trust the Process against Bills Mafia. So in those later weeks, I will look to highlight the outcomes of those games a bit more, but I'm really intrigued as of where we are right now at the 6th seed storyline that's developed here into the midseason. So the 6th seed is shaping up to how I mentioned it last week. Huge Dicka gets the needed win against Kevin, notching his 2nd win of the season now. And believe it or not, just a game behind the 6th seed and outputting 155, clearly showing that his roster on paper is certainly the strongest contender for not just the 6th seed, but to potentially make some noise in the playoffs if things are right. Obviously, Captain Kirk now out for the rest of the season on our Achilles tear. Sam Howell should be a serviceable replacement, having had some really nice games, but he's also had a couple disastrous weeks, so nothing's really clean here in terms of how the 6th is going to play out. That said, I think it is worthwhile to do another dive in reconnecting and circling back to those week 5 for the 6th seed, the video that I did then. So I'll do a lighter version of that now, just as an update. So based on that, after that analysis is how I will have done the rankings for the remaining 6 through 9. I'll start with last week's team that came at number 6 on the season on this power rankings. So starting with Wooksy Fingerhold, Wooksy is in the hardest stretch of schedule by far that started in week 7 against Moncton Meerkats. He then had Bills Mafia in week 8. And after all that, he still got 3 left to face to finish out the gauntlet of 5 consecutive weeks against the consensus 5 teams of the league. Momentum heading into week 12, which is a trade deadline for CCK, is probably what will determine what moves, if any, Brad makes. But on the surface, it looks like he will be guaranteed to sit at 3 and 8 heading into week 12. Now, this week's matchup against Full Jerry is probably his highest chance for to pull off an upset victory, given the number of buys John is facing. But now with Nakua not playing with Stafford in week 9, the chances seem pretty dire to upset against John even this week. So I've got Wooksy continue out his current 2 games losing streak out to 5 games heading into week 12. But he's got a chance to finish out strong in the closing week. So Wooksy will finish out somewhere between 6-8 to as worst as 4-10. But I think Brad, he definitely picks up a win against Two Shots No Cup. And I think he ends up splitting one against Moncton Meerkat, against Mr. Ambassador and Kevin to finish out at 5-8, coming just short of playoffs. But Brad, out of all the other managers I'm at the highlight, he's the only manager who currently has the rest of the season scheduling where it allows for Brad to control his own destiny to the playoffs. having facing 3 winnable matchups, where all the other managers that you'll see is 2 winnable matchups. So win out those 3 winnable matchups, get to 6-8. He's probably the only team that's going to be able to get to 6-8, which means that he controls his own destiny to the playoffs without having to settle the tiebreakers or looking at other teams' results. All right. Last week's number 7 was Mr. Ambassador, so let's move over to him. The most important week for playoff implications on Mr. Ambassador's schedule has to be his Week 11 matchup against Huge Dicka. And with the Week 12 matchup right after against Brad, Sergey is very much still the biggest influencer of the 6th playoff seeding outcomes. Every single scenario alters the playoff landscape for the 6th seed based on those weeks. That Week 11, Week 12 matchup for Sergey. A Mr. Ambassador loss to both of those teams, as sleeper projections would indicate, would mean that Brad has a chance to sneak into the playoffs without a tiebreaker if he can beat Kevin in week 4, if Brad ends up beating Kevin in week 14. And then Travis, that means that he's going to be, on the outside looking in. And then if Travis, if he ends up beating basically means that if he ends up losing to Travis, but beats Wuxi, it probably means that Travis is able to get into playoffs because he is likely to beat the tiebreaker against Brad. But on the other scenario, if Mr. Ambassador beats Huge Dicka but loses to Brad, then it very much, I don't see a scenario where Travis ends up making the playoffs. That said, I also don't see a scenario at the moment where Sergey makes the playoffs. However, I do think Sergey will finish out this season between 3-11 and 4-10, missing out on the playoffs right now. But he's got a really, really fun role. I think he's going to be able to determine quite a bit. And like I said, in week 5, that's going to be an asset for him as a trade deadline in week 12 approaches. And he can use that as an asset for him. All right, moving over to last week's number 8 in Kevin. I think after week 9, there will be a 4-way tie. So after this week, there will be a 4-way tie at the 6th seed of teams sitting at 3-6. Kevin has a chance to be the sole 6th at the 4 and sitting at 4-6 after week 10 because he has a matchup against Two Shots No Cup. But that said, I don't think it will be I think it will be a short-term mirage of hope, as I just don't see a scenario where Kevin makes the playoffs anymore when you look at the remaining schedule, unless there's a massive breakdown against his opponents and that he faces in week 9, 11, 12, and 13, where Kevin sneaks a victory against the same opponents. And those opponents in week 9, 11, 12, 13, Trust the Process, Mock the Meerkats, Bills Mafia, and Brady Star Dynasty, in a theoretical heads up against those 4 teams through the first 8 weeks of the season, he is 2-30. That said, beyond the theoretical, win against Brandon in week 5, Kevin did actually sneak an actual victory against Ryan in week 4. So should any situations like that arise again, that changes the equation completely. So the one path for Kevin to make the playoffs is for Kevin to get another surprising upset and beating Wuxi to keep make it a season sweep in week 14. Then he'd be sitting at 6-8, not requiring any tiebreakers. Any other best case scenario, though, requires tiebreakers, which I think Kevin is too far behind to be able to win against in any tiebreaker that may happen, because he's going to be up against Brad and Huge Dicka, who are both well ahead of him in points for, which I believe is the first category for the tiebreaker. Realistically, I think Kevin finished out this season at 4-10, but he's got a chance to get to 4-9. All right, so okay. Moving over to the manager on the hottest seat of them all, Travis and his Huge Dicka. The mark is at 6 wins, where you'd guarantee a playoff berth. If Travis ends at 5, he would need other managers to not get over 5. So I don't think there's a way that Travis gets to 6. So it's unfortunate that he has to count on other teams not necessarily getting to the 6 wins. But that said, the good news is Travis is currently expected to win any tiebreakers on points for against the rest of the 3 other managers as well in this group. So looking ahead at Travis's schedule, he's sitting at 2-6. So how does he get to well, let's just be theoretical. How would he get to 6? Well, there's his third win in week 9, facing Two Shots No Cup. In week 10, hard to say against full Jerry. And then let's say week 11 is a win for Huge Dicka, which isn't necessarily a guaranteed game anyways, given that Captain Kirk is being out. And that week, he's not going to have Alvin Kamara or Chris Olave, as they're going to be out on their buys, against a pretty full strength Sergey. So let's just say, toss it up, and let's just say that's going to be Travis's 4th win. I just don't see him going 500 against the 4 other gauntlet of matchups in that week 10 against full Jerry, week 12, week 13, and week 14, week 13 and 14 to finish out the season. That said, I can see him pulling 1 win against those 4. So I don't see him getting to 6 wins, but I do definitely think that his realistic finish is going to be somewhere like 5 wins. And the road to playoffs because of that exists for Travis. But that's the path. The path is down to basically 1. Is he's going to have to hope to win the games he's supposed to win and hope for no crazy upsets from the other 3 managers competing for the 6th seed. So they all end up at a season finish of 5-9. That's at a single slip by Travis, like a loss to Two Shots No Cup this week or to Sergey in week 11, would absolutely guarantee Travis being in the toilet bowl, even in that scenario. All right, so assuming that's what happens, here are basically the weeks where Travis has likely bookmarked. Week 9, like I said, is a must win. Week 10, looking for a victory over full Jerry. It's not a must have, but if he pulls off a victory over full Jerry, he has a chance to move him up to the most likely to make the playoffs by a decent margin at that point. So, it's not something that if he wins in week 10, it's actually, you're probably not sweating bullets through the finishing weeks of the season anymore, as he's going to finally have reclaimed the likeliest position to get into 6 at that point. All right, looking at week 11, it's got to be a must. Again, a misstep here means that you're out. Week 12 against and then in week 12, what he's looking at, not his schedule, he's hoping for Mr. Ambassador to beat Brad. This is not a must again, but if Travis did not beat John in week 10, it would mean that this result of Mr. Ambassador beating Brad in week 12 would nearly guarantee that the team that makes the playoffs will be a 5-9 team, which then Travis is likely to be favored heavily to beat any tiebreakers. And then that would also mean that Travis is not now heading into week 14 sweating bullets to see what happens between Wooksy and Kevin in their rematch, as that's likely going to be the matchup to look. So looking at week 14, he's got to make sure that in that matchup between Kevin and Wooksy, the rematch, that as the result of that matchup, there's no 6-8 team that's going to be coming out of that at the end conclusion of that matchup. But here are some wrinkles. There are wrinkles to this. There's 2. First one, incentives and alignment. Bills Mafia faces Mr. Ambassador. Trust a Process faces Huge Dicka in week 14. I've got Mr. Ambassador's first rounder. Mr. Ambassador has Huge Dicka's first rounder. Incentives for all 4 managers could be really, really funky. And depending on standings of Mr. Ambassador and Huge Dicka in week 14, all those interesting alignments and incentives might kick in. What I mean by that is if I've secured my playoff bye week by week 14, and if Sergey is the one in the hunt for the 6th seed alongside Travis, I likely sit my players and let Travis make the playoffs, or let him take the win so that he makes the playoffs, given that I have Sergey's first rounder this year, while Sergey has Travis. And it's unlikely possibility given what I've stated about Mr. Ambassador's rest of schedule strength earlier, but I would put nothing to chances. I wouldn't want to put it past Bills Mafia to try to elevate Sergey's chances of winning in 14 to upset my ping pong ball chances. So there's a lot of interesting wrinkles to this that we could theoretically get into E14. It's fun thinking about a potential scenario, but it exists. And then second, I also don't believe, this is not necessarily on Travis, but this is a note for all the 4 teams that we've done analysis on, right? I actually personally do not believe that Eve will finish out winless. If that becomes true, meaning that he at least gets 1 win, then it will likely come from one of those 4 teams that we've been highlighting who are in contention for the 6th seed today. So for those 4 teams, a loss to 2 shots no cup will actually basically erase their chances at playoffs, no matter if they're in the lead. Yeah, it's that tight across those 4. That said, Eve has only finished better than last. So in a theoretical heads up against the pool of the other 9 managers, he's only won once in a theoretical matchup. So that would be basically a 1 and against everyone else, right? So it's 9, 7, 72. So it's basically 1 and 71 record in a theoretical matchup against everyone. So the math is of him perfectly going winless is actually the most likely outcome. But I just believe somewhere deep down in my heart that Eve will meet his quest of scoring 100 points this season. And I think it will be scripted in to also net him his first and only victory for the season, if and when that happens. So this is where we're at in terms of analysis, the playoff thoughts for that 6th seed. So let's go and put this all into the power rankings. I am going to keep Brad at number 6 as last week, as he's the only team right now that can control his own destiny, that is also paired on a in a schedule that's favorable to him compared to the other 3 managers, as he's the only one that faces 3 compared to other people facing 2 in this same group. So that's why I've got him at 6. But closely behind a 7, I'm actually moving up Travis now, for all the reasons that we talked about. At number 8, I've got Kevin, and at number 9, I've got Mr. Ambassador. So we talked about the Fantasy Pros odds last week, and I thought that was really, really interesting. So I'll verbally share where my estimates are probably for these teams, and then I'll also include what Fantasy Pros has them at right now. I personally got Brad and Travis's odds of making the playoffs basically at 45 to 45. So relative to each other, it's basically a coin flip. And with the remaining 10% being split between Kevin and Mr. Ambassador. But I'm sharing the math from Fantasy Pros, or the numbers from Fantasy Pros, and here it is. 47-35, 7 for Kevin, 13 for Mr. Ambassador. So that does it for week 8 recap and power rankings heading into week 9. I'll be back home on Wednesday, so looking forward to watching the games from my own couch and on my own TV. Good luck this week, boys. Hope you guys enjoy Halloween, and see ya.